And it's my great pleasure to introduce Louise Henshaw, who's a teacher who's got a keen interest in British social and economic history, having studied that subject at Stirling University. And she teaches mainly A-level history, but also she runs an adult history group at Ickenham that I think some people on this call are probably members of. So her subject takes us up to the lovely county of Derbyshire and doubtless elsewhere as well. Over to you, please, Louise, for your subject this evening, which is Bess of Hardwick. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for joining me. I will move this out of my way, if I may, and then I'll just have my. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Not yet. You'll need to click share screen again.
Okay.
The green button near the bottom.
Right. I knew something would go wrong. Right. Okay. So here we go. So hopefully you can see this. Is that okay for everybody?
It's lovely. Yeah, it's there.
Lovely.
Super.
Right.
Thank you.
Don't worry, it's not death by PowerPoint. I promise it won't be every single thing won't be up on a slide. It's really just to give you an idea of some of the sites and some of the key facts, really, when we're looking at Bess. I encountered Bess a few years ago, just in the course of doing a course on trailblazers and troublemakers. So women throughout history who've been a little bit different for their time. And Bess certainly is one of those women. It's not exactly a rags to riches tale that we're looking at here, not at all. She's not exactly badly off in the first place. And she's not a gold digger either. She is unfortunate in that she is widowed 3 times, and it seems to be a bit of a rollover lottery. Every time she loses her husband, she seems to acquire their fortune. But she was a really important woman from the point of view that she was a businesswoman. So let me just go to my next slide. So these are some of her achievements. Hopefully you can see these. She was the most powerful woman in England after Elizabeth I. She was incredibly wealthy. So obviously those of you who know it, there's Hardwick Hall in the background. She's widowed 4 times, which isn't an achievement. I take that it's not exactly an achievement, but it does show that, you know, she manages to battle through some very, very tough times in her life and manages to leave quite an important legacy in terms of building Hardwick Hall, which was adjacent to her first childhood home, which was also called Hardwick Hall. But she comes back later, comes back stronger, and builds this huge, magnificent hall, which was just absolutely stunning for its time. She's also builds Chatsworth as well. She's the original wife of she's William Cavendish wife, and she's instrumental in getting Chatsworth Hall built, and then obviously it's built on. So she also has lineage to the Mitford sisters, through Deborah Cavendish, obviously, the previous Lady Cavendish. She was also the guardian of Mary Queen of Scots as well, which you may not have been aware of. She was she with her 4th husband was custodian of Mary Queen of Scots for about 15 years when she turned up unexpectedly in England. She was a superb businesswoman. She had money in her own right. She had land, she had mines, she had glassware workshops, and also she became the lady of the bedchamber to Elizabeth I through one of her marriages. And lastly, she was also the grandmother to an heir to the throne. And things may have gone a completely different course had her granddaughter being accepted as the rightful heir into the Stewart line. Her granddaughter was essentially James I of England, or England's cousin. So that might be something that might be a bit of a surprise to you as well. She's extremely well connected. Okay, so let's just go on to the next one. So there's just a few things that I want to point out. Is we'll get on to this one in a minute, so I just might go back for a sec. her early life was really important. She was, her father was a country gentleman, so there was land in the family, and he died when she was just a baby. She was born in 1527. The Hardwick family had lived on land in Derbyshire for at least 2 centuries, so they were, you know, pretty much well acquainted with Derbyshire, and they, you know, were a locally known family. So he died suddenly, her father, but he'd made provisions for his family. But there was a problem with the estates after he died, and his son was too young to inherit. So quite a lot of the land was taken away from them. So they sort of end up, the Hardwick family, falling on hard times. And Bess has to go away and work for a family, the Zushas, that live nearby, at the age of 12. So she works for this family. She would have been, I guess, looking after the children, and not exactly a scullery maid, but being looked after and looking after parts of their house in return. And it was through the Zush family that she met and married a Derbyshire neighbour called Robert Barlow. And of course, in this time, and also at this in this class of people, marrying was more a business arrangement at this point. It wasn't really about love, it was about making the right connections. And Robert Barlow was 13 when he married Bess, who was 15 at this point. But unfortunately, the marriage doesn't last long, and she's widowed at the grand age of 16. Can you imagine? In 1545, because Robert had died within 18 months of them marrying. Now, this is where it gets interesting with Bess, is that at 16 years old, she's willing to take her in-laws to court to get what's rightfully hers. And I have to admire her for this. She's denied the power of what's called her dower, which would have granted her for life a third of the projected income that her husband would have been expected to bring in. And this would have been comprised of rents and revenues that would have been drawn from her husband's estate as the oldest son. But his younger brother was down to inherit. His guardian, the brother's guardian, got involved and said that the marriage was not consummated and therefore Bess couldn't inherit. Well, this wasn't good enough for Bess. So in 1547, she took him to court. She took the family, the in-laws and the guardian to court to get what was rightfully hers. And she was offered a compromise where she'd renounce her claim in return for a small settlement. But this wasn't good enough for her, because she had a family to support. She had a mother, she had siblings to support. She gave evidence herself at the grand age of 16 that she was in financial trouble, and her mother couldn't help her as her stepfather was in debtor's prison. And then she had a bit of good luck where her husband's uncle also became involved, and she got everything that she was entitled to. So she received a third part of the family manor house from the Barlow family, a land with 80 cottages. This is at 16 years old. 880 acres of land, woods, meadows, pastures and heath. And this provided her with a respectable amount of income, but it still didn't mean she was in the same sort of arena as someone in the class above her. You know, she was not exactly struggling, but she was doing all right for 16, let's put it that way. But it's not enough to make sure that she needs further connections. She needs to further help in terms of establishing herself. So we're just going to move on to that now. Just bear with me. Right. Okay, right. So the Tudor lineage is important here. And I didn't write this one, so whoever spelled Henry has got it horribly wrong. But I just want you to pay attention to this corner here on the right-hand side in the bottom, okay? So we have, this part is really important here, because what Bess does is she moves in and becomes a gentlewoman to Lady Frances Grey. Okay, so she marries Henry Grey. So she's been married sorry, these are not my typos. It's just to give you, it's the clearest family tree we've got. So if you remember, Mary Tudor had married Charles Brandon, who was a friend of Henry VIII. very, they looked like they were identical twins, the pair of them. And they had a child, Frances Brandon, and she married Henry Grey. Okay. And they had a daughter, Lady Jane Grey. Okay. So you see how phenomenally well connected Bess is from quite an early age. She has she's managed to get involved with the Greys, and at this point in time, when all of this is going on, this is towards the end of Henry's reign and into Edward's reign. Now, if you remember your history books, you'll remember that Lady Jane Grey was the named successor for Edward VI, the son of Henry VIII. So this is an incredible piece of good luck that that Bess ends up working with Frances Brandon and becomes well connected. This is going to be a little bit difficult later on, though, when Edward dies, of course, because Mary, Queen Mary, is not happy to see Protestants possibly interfering in the line, and obviously Lady Jane Grey is executed. But at this stage in her life, when she's 17 years old, this is a good match, because it leads to her second marriage. Okay, so let me just go to that one. Any questions on that, or is that okay? The lineage, is that okay? Is that clear?
Yeah, I think so, Louise.
Okay, lovely. Right, so this is her second marriage. Now, this is William Cavendish. Okay, he is one of the men that's in Henry Grey's circle. And he marries Bess when she's 19 and he's 40. So this is someone that she gets into his orbit when she's working for Francis Grey, or Francis Grey at this point. Cavendish had been knighted in 1546 by Henry VIII, and this made Bess, she then became Lady Cavendish, and therefore a member of the royal court. So she's, has an important husband, and so she gets into that orbit of Edward and later on Elizabeth as well. It's a happy marriage. They have 6 surviving children within 10 years, and he has a few children from his earlier marriage as well. The thing about Tudor women as well was that they were trusted to do a lot of things by themselves. This might come as a bit of a surprise. It's not until the Industrial Revolution that women sort of end up giving away so much of their power to run households, to run dairies, for instance, to run small-scale industry. And this was a big feature of women at this point in society, in nobility and also in the gentry, that they needed to come to a marriage with some skills to do with husbandry and making sure they could run businesses really well. So Bess is one, she is a woman of her time. She is trusted to run the houses that William Cavendish owns, and when they buy the land around Chatsworth, she's in charge of supervising some of the architecture. She's the one that makes sure that it's built in the right place by the river, the drainage systems. She seems to be a really hands-on woman, and she's got 6 kids at this point as well. She's also left in charge of making decisions around land enclosure as well. It's getting the rentals from the locals who live on the land. Also, at one point, for architectural reasons, she gets a whole village transported a few miles down the road. So this is a woman that's really involved in not only her marriage, but also in the business of running the estate. And as I say, this was something that was entirely typical of Tudor times, where women were expected to not do any, not sit beautifully like a Jane Austen novel. They were supposed to be working, and this is certainly what Bess was really involved in. So Cavendish, just to give you a bit of an idea about him, he'd been married twice before and he had 3 young daughters. So now at the age of 19, when Bess married him, they became her stepdaughters. Now Cavendish is a curious sort of fellow, because he was a really important part of Henry VIII's circle. He in fact helped Thomas Cromwell with the dissolution of the monasteries. So he's absolutely, there's no doubts about his Protestant faith. And he then became the treasurer of the King's Chamber under Edward. And the problem is that he seemed to get into a lot of trouble, William, with finances. He falls from grace under Mary. Obviously, this was not hard to do because he was a Protestant and Mary was as Catholic as anything. So he falls foul of her because there's a lot of dodgy accountancy has been going on while he's been treasurer, and not all the money can be accounted for. And he seems to have an awful lot more money than someone of his station in life. So he falls from grace, and actually what he's under suspicion, £6,000 couldn't be accounted for, and he had bought a title for himself. He bought the title of treasurer from King Edward with the understanding he would more than make up for it with the money he was going to make. So this really drags Bess into the situation, and he's accused of embezzling money, but dies in 1557 when he's being investigated for that. And just at that time when he may well have forfeited his land and his money. Okay. So this is Chatsworth, okay? So this is the original. Sorry, it's a bit fuzzy, but it's this is the original building that was cited there by Bess, okay? There's a better picture coming up next. So this is a needle point from that period of time. Okay, so this is Chatsworth, which really was, you know, the seat, and it still is the seat, as we know, of the Cavendish family now in Derbyshire. Luckily for Bess, you won't be surprised to learn that she got the lot when poor old William died. So this was something that went into her family, and she makes sure that she recovers money that is apparently William died in debt for about £5,000. He was in debt when he died, and it looked like her money may disappear, but with her friend John Thynne of Longleat, you know that, we know that name, of course, she was able to raise objection to this debt of £5,000, and she appeals to Parliament, and the debt is suspended. So she lives to see another day, with good connections there, and of course everything was left to her and her children, for her lifetime. So she gets Chatsworth, but by this time she's been widowed twice, sorry, and she's 30. So, you know, she's out there sort of, you know, trying to keep things together, keep the businesses together, keep the land together, and stop it, of course, when you marry in Tudor times, up until relatively recently. If you're a married woman, you know, until the 1880s or 1860s, you would forfeit your property on marriage. So there's always the problem that wealth may leave her as well. So that's another remarkable aspect to her. And of course, being able to bring this up in Parliament shows some elevation of her status as well, that she could have the ear of presumably the House of Lords, actually, through John Thynne, and then also MPs as well. So yeah, this remarkable connection is really important. Okay, so here we are. The next one. So this is the next contestant. This is William St. Lou. Now, he's an important person, and this really is the way in which she's brought into Elizabeth's sphere of influence. Okay, he's a supporter of Elizabeth's. In fact, he was involved with the Wyatt's Rebellion, which was, you know, there to try and bring Elizabeth to power and take out Mary, her sister. Extremely well connected. Anyone that spent any time like I have in Dawlish and Exeter, that area, will be familiar with the Courtneys, who own Powderham Castle. I don't know if you've been and seeing that. So these, you know, he's another extremely well connected man. He's also he knew Lord Somerset before he got the chop, and Lord Mountjoy, of course, who becomes famous much later on with subduing the Irish in the Irish Rebellion later on towards the end of Elizabeth's reign. Now, as a wedding gift, so he's made the personal yeoman guard for Elizabeth because of all of his great service. And as a wedding gift, Bess is made Lady of the Privy Chamber, which gives extremely close access to the monarch. So if you're if you're that close, you have the ear of the Queen, you're privy to, as pardon the pun, you're around for all this, the sort of gossip, the inside track on everything, and friendship as well with the Queen. So those are really important. So again, she manages to find another place in society. Now, the curious thing with William was that he'd been married before, but he had no male heirs. So what was supposed to happen, or certainly his brother thought this would happen, was that there were bound to be no more kids coming his way, and what would happen is that Edward would be the one that would inherit everything, and Edward would be able to take on the estates. But with William marrying, it kind of puts a different complexion on things. And so at one point, quite early on in the marriage, Edward, William's brother, tries to poison her to try and prevent there being any more children. And he tries to poison his own brother as well, but it didn't seem to take much effect on him. But eventually, when her husband dies in 1565, she's given his entire estate. And of course, that moves to her children as well. So again, this marriage is important from the point of view that it brings her into the orbit of important people. In fact, every step of the way, from the Greys to Lady Jane Grey, and now Edward, and now this marriage, which brings her in contact with Elizabeth I, it really becomes important here. Now, her last marriage is probably it has the most resonance, really. Now, George Talbot, the Earl of Shrewsbury, is another one he's extremely rich. He's made his money from coal, lead, iron mining, and it's extraordinary because by this point, I mean, it was going to be, so she is now she's 41 at this point, so there's not likely to be any children. So you can see that this is a business opportunity for both. This is a business arrangement. This is lots and lots of wealth meeting lots of other wealth, if you see what I mean. So his land brought coal, lead, iron mining, and he'd been married before. He had 5 children on his own. Now, Talbot had the dubious pleasure of being the custodian of Mary, Queen of Scots. Mary came down in about 1567, and from the moment she arrived, it was going to be troublesome for Elizabeth I. And then you have the revolt of the Northern Earls, and then you have various plots across the time period involving, or certainly the sort of fingerprints of Mary, Queen of Scots on some of these plots to assassinate Elizabeth and take over as queen. So Talbot, when it's realised that Mary really can't be allowed to run free, she's kind of kept in this luxury accommodation, which is essentially a prison. And really, the Earl of Shrewsbury is one of those guys that has to make sure that she is locked up safely at night. Now, this is an extraordinary position where Bess meets and is friends with both Mary, Queen of Scots, and Elizabeth I. And as we know, contrary to Hollywood, we know that Mary, Queen of Scots and Elizabeth never met. Whereas we know that there is some sort of go-between who was looking after Mary, Queen of Scots. Apparently they were great friends. There was no problem with Mary, Queen of Scots and Bess, because it was so well known that Bess was a Protestant. There was no way that she was going to convert to Mary, Queen of Scots' cause, but she felt great sympathy for her, and they spent a lot of their time embroidering together, and she really tried to make life more comfortable for her. Now Talbot, in return for being the custodian, was made a privy councillor, so he again politically is very close to Elizabeth at this point. And on the flip side, it means that Bess is going to spend a lot of her time with Mary Queen of Scots, whether she likes it or not. So this is some of the properties that Talbot owned. So on the left we have Sheffield Castle, and that was one of the properties that he owned that Mary was kept in confinement, and also Tutbury Castle as well. So these two castles were part of Talbot's, or the Earl of Shrewsbury's, background, and it was more or less, you know, you couldn't really refuse Elizabeth I. It was, you had to do it really, and this put tremendous strains on their marriage. And this is the only marriage that really failed, in fact, because the strain of this was too much, because essentially Mary was seen as the focal point for every single disaffected Catholic in England. And when you've got also behind them, you've got the Pope, and you've got half of Europe who are also willing to come in on the side of a potential new queen in the guise of Mary Queen of Scots. So there are, you know, huge problems and huge stresses and strains on their marriage, and they don't divorce, but they separate, Bess and Talbot, or the Earl of Shrewsbury. Now, when she marries Talbot, she knew that then that all of her fortune went over to him, all her land, her wealth, her property, all went over to him potentially. And this strain that was put on the marriage, well, it ended up with being the rumour that perhaps Shrewsbury was a little more than just the custodian of Mary Queen of Scots, and they may well have been having an affair. So there was a financial arrangement made between Bess and her husband, and she took her money and she moved on to creating Hardwick Hall, which I'll talk about in a minute. But the other genius thing she did, which would be a bit odd for our times, I appreciate, was that in order to make sure that the money stayed within her family, she married a couple of her children off into the Talbot line. So, for instance, one of her daughters married the heir to the Earl of Shrewsbury, so essentially one of the step siblings. So this was in order to safeguard that fortune. So Bess is always thinking, you know, ahead, and thinking you know, what's going to be best for her children and their futures. And at this point, with the money that she gains from the settlement with her husband, with this, I guess, compensation, really, she ends up moving back to Hardwick Hall, or rather back to the land that would be Hardwick Hall. So let me just go on and look at some of this. Okay, so the land at Hardwick Hall. So this, adjacent to this, was the property where she was brought up. Now the building is really extraordinary because, as everybody knows, there's more glass than the wall. That so it goes. The fact that you would be able to you know, afford this amount of glass and all of the skill that went into this showed that you were a woman of wealth. And if you notice, the stories of them get bigger and bigger. So the first and second floor are considerably shorter than the floors above, and they get bigger as they go up, indicating the different social status of people that would be entertained there. So this is all about giving the right kind of image, this sort of image of real power and real wealth, and that's really important at this point. I mean, it's a beauty. I'm sure most of you have been there, or a great deal of you have been there. It's her baby, it's her building. There's no man attached to it at this point. You know, that marriage is sort of on the backslide at this point, and what she's doing is creating a legacy for herself and for her children. So let's just have a look at some of these other points. So we have here her initials at this point, so Elizabeth Shrewsbury. And these are really important, sort of, you know, this is not brandishing her husband, this is about her, and this is about her image. She dies in 1608, so it's completed about 11 years before her death. The money was partly raised, as I say, as a result of this lengthy dispute. But it's a real tribute that she comes home, really, and she makes her life in a place that she loved. So yeah, I just want to make sure I've said everything I want to on Hardwick Hall. I mean, yeah, the way in which the architecture was very new, Renaissance architecture, which was really new for that time period as well. And yeah, it's a real statement. Now, this is at a time when you've got a queen on the throne who's also big on making statements as well. So, you know, the idea that Bess lives in a time period where we've had two queens. Where, you know, women have power and you know, and powerful women, and particularly Elizabeth, you know, someone that, you know, stood on her own 2 feet, and really she didn't marry, she remained very independent. I think this really resonates here with Bess, because she does this on her own without, you know, obviously she's got quite a lot of money behind her, but she does this for, you know, for her family, her side of the family entirely. And everything at this point was about image. If you think about the Gloriana cult with Elizabeth, and, you know, signifying wealth and power, this all fits into that time period completely. And yeah, this sort of grandeur of it all is really there to make a statement. So her last achievement is one that not everyone is aware of, but it's this young lady here called Arbella Stewart. Okay, now, as we can see, Bess is a bit of a mover and a shaker, and she's able to get her children and her heirs in the right place at the right time, in much the same way as she had found that too. Now, she had a daughter called Elizabeth, who she just wasn't able to marry to the right man until, let me just go and look at, if we just look at the story here, her daughter Elizabeth was still unmarried. Can you believe it? At 18, how shocking. And try as they might, they couldn't find anyone that would be a possibly good match for Elizabeth. Now, this is Elizabeth Cavendish, okay, so this is a couple of marriages back. Now, she was a friend of Countess Lennox. Bess is one of her mates, was Bess, Countess Lennox, who was the mother of one Lord Darnley. Okay, we all heard of him. Mary Queen of Scots' husband, late husband, who apparently had a strain, his house blew up, and when they found his body, it seemed like he'd been strangled as well, for good measure. So there was no CSI forensics at the time, but it looked pretty much like he'd been bumped off by Mary Queen of Scots. So Lord Darnley had a brother called Charles Stewart, and Bess settled on him for Elizabeth Cavendish, that he might be a good match for her daughter. So at this point, Elizabeth is 18, and Charles Stewart, Lord Darnley's younger brother, is 19. Now, they already had a claim to the Stewart line, to the Tudor line. They were related to the Tudors via Henry VII's daughter Margaret, who married James V of Scotland. So there were a nice connection there for Bess to get involved in. This meant that there would be one last shot at getting another heir to the throne that wasn't James I, because James the Fourth of Scotland, James VI, sorry, of Scotland. There was one last chance to get one heir that might be a possibility. So the whole line of history may have been completely changed, and all of this came from Bess. So Bess's daughter was now going to provide an heir to the throne. And this was dangerous, though, because Elizabeth I didn't take too happy to this marriage arrangement between Elizabeth and Charles Stewart, because she was desperately afraid of being usurped, taken off the throne, either by this point, Mary Queen of Scots is dead, but there's always these worries that someone else is going to turn up and take her place. And Elizabeth absolutely flew into a rage over this, and actually imprisoned Countess Lennox over this. Charles Stewart died of TB, and Elizabeth Cavendish died 6 years later at the age of 26. The Stewart marriage had produced one heir, and that was Arbella, or Arabella, depending on where you're reading. And she is born in 1575. Now, Bess became Arbella's guardian, and tried to persuade Elizabeth I to grant Arbella money to keep her in the style that an heir should be accustomed to. But Elizabeth was more worried that Arbella would find the right supporters and take her out of circulation. Now, this is the one thing about Bess that I don't like. It seemed that she kept Arbella almost a prisoner, because being a claimant to the throne, it meant that she was also vulnerable to attack and all sorts of, problems with other jealous claimants as well. She refused to let Arbella marry, and constantly worried that she'd be harmed. Arbella, also Elizabeth wanted to keep Arbella from getting married as well, so that she wouldn't have any heirs that might cause problems for Elizabeth. When James came to the throne, when James I came to the throne, Arbella was welcomed at court, but when Arbella plotted to marry into the Seymour family, James had her locked in the Tower and she was banished. She escaped and was intercepted trying to get to France, but she was imprisoned again in the Tower, and I think she starved to death. By 1614, she died. So that was extinguished that particular line. And of course, we know with James, we have Charles, and the rest of the family come after that, the Stewart line, although a slightly unreliable line, let's say. Arbella unfortunately was taken out of the line of succession pretty early on. The dynasty and the legacy of Bess, well, as we know, she didn't come from a terribly poor background, but she's a real survivor in her time. To be married so many times, and also to be seen as smart enough, presumably, that people would want to marry her, because at that point she has the money and the know-how and the capabilities to work for her family. She's obviously an attractive option for the men that marry her, but in each marriage she manages to make a real impression, and she really manages to make her mark with it Chatsworth, or with the castles that she came in Tutbury Castle and Sheffield Castle, and then latterly Hardwick Hall as well. She's really important because her ancestors are still around today. So the Cavendishes, her son inherited that title. She also married her daughters into the Shrewsbury line as well. So they're around, and they're also within the family dynasty of the Stewart line, and also they're really important in terms of the sort of social history around Lady Jane Grey and the Seymours. So she's really interwoven in this time period, and she was 6 years older than Elizabeth, and she survived her by 5 years. But she really lived a real life, and certainly didn't rest on her laurels when the money came rolling in. She's a really intelligent woman of her times, and this is obviously her tomb. She's a really attractive person from history to look at. There's a lot about her, there's a lot of vibrancy, there's a lot of character to her. She's not sort of two-dimensional, one-dimensional, as you see with lots of Tudor women at this time, and a woman who was able to move through life and was able to show some real intelligence and a real tenacity throughout it. Okay.
Lovely, thank you very much, Louise. That's an amazing tour of, as you say, what a fascinating life. Yes,
definitely, absolutely.
And yes, where can I just ask, where is that tomb? Is it near Hardwick Hall in the church there?
Yeah, let me just look that up. Just bear with me a sec. There's usually something that I've missed. So where she's buried, Hardwick. All right, just bear with me. Yeah, Derby Cathedral.
Oh, right.
So she's buried there.
Yes. Someone just said that. Yes, someone said it in the chat window. Yes, you weren't quite quick enough, Louise.
I know. Yeah. And again, this is quite the tomb as well, and I think that's really important as well. you know, this shows, you know, someone who's well thought of, and yeah, has that kind of, you know, that sort of, you know, kind of a grandeur about her as well. Yeah, she's a really important woman. Any other questions?
I'm sure there'll be lots of questions, so
Okay,
please feel free, anyone who wants to ask, to unmute yourself and speak, or type in the chat window, whichever you prefer.
Louise, can I ask, do we know what happened to the poisoning brother-in-law? Did he just get away with it, or?
Well, they knew. I've got it in my notes. Yeah, they knew. They could never pin it on him, but they had very strong suspicions that it was him. Yeah, because it happened when he was visiting. And yeah, although accomplices were rounded up, it was impossible to charge him. So yeah, but it seems like he had the means, the motive, and opportunity, doesn't it? So yeah, bit difficult back then to pin it on him, absolutely. But yeah, the accomplices were rounded up.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Any more questions?
Could you clarify the Arabella Stewart connection again? I don't think I've got it. I'm probably a bit slow.
No, you're not. Yeah, you're up. Right. Let me do my pointy finger bit. So you've got Henry VII, okay, and that line which goes down from Margaret Tudor, who was his daughter, married into the Stewart line, okay, and then you've got oh no, now I've lost it. Hold on. So then you've got the Stewart line, and it ends up where you have Lord Darnley is the grandson of Margaret. Okay, so he is the great grandson of Henry VII, and then his brother is also the great grandson of Henry VII as well. And that
sometime.
Luckily, you're familiar with my vagaries and my waving my hands around and looking in the air. But yeah, the line comes from Henry VII, where his daughter
marries. There's a whole
marries
historical fiction about that. There's a book about that, isn't there?
Oh, is there?
I can't remember the writer's name, but it's a famous historical author. Did you see her, Chris, at the it's one of the talks they had locally?
Oh yes, I can't remember her name though.
No, I can't, because I don't read historical fiction. No. But I have friends who are very enthusiastic, and I always think maybe it's a good thing, really. But
it's not the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I think I know who you're talking about.
I think that's when I realised that connection. I mean, somebody from Derbyshire explaining about Bess of Hardwick, and it did seem remarkable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's interesting to hear the story. Thank you.
Let us see if Wikipedia, does this help you at all, Louise?
Oh, yes, it may well do. It's for those awkward people that go to my history group on a Friday. You want to know these things. Right, okay, so over here.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I'll have to do the pointing for you, unless you do.
Yes, of course you do.
So let's.
Yeah, so we've got King Henry VII.
Where do you want to start?
And then we've got Margaret Tudor up here, okay. And then we have their daughter Margaret down here in the green. Yeah, she marries the Earl of Lennox, and they have two boys. You see, Lord Charles Stewart, and then Boo Hiss, Lord Darnley, the bad guy. And then you've got Lady Arabella or Arbella down here. Okay, she dies in the Tower of London, and then her cousin, correspondingly, is James I of England. So they were cousins. Does that make sense?
I hope that helps the person who asked that question.
Was that all right? Was that all right, Mrs. Mills?
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking of Annie Lennox then. From
Annie, don't go off track. This isn't history on a Friday. Anybody else?
Good Scottish name, probably.
I was going to ask, just out of interest, when she married William Cavendish at the age of 19, you said she had 3 stepdaughters. Presumably, all or some of them were older than her, so she had stepdaughters older than herself.
Absolutely, yeah. And some of them, actually, a couple of them, I don't know if they were that much younger. I think they were around the same age. but yeah, so they were quite, they weren't toddlers by
so
any
a curious
means.
situation to have a stepdaughter who's older than yourself. Yes.
And she seems to be somebody that, encounters these very adult situations at quite a young age. Yeah, absolutely. Anybody else?
I think that I've read that Elizabeth I was very keen on other people spending money on her behalf.
Yes.
And
oh, yeah.
I believe that Shrewsbury was almost bankrupted by having to be custodian of.
That's right. Yeah, nothing came for there was no expense spared. I mean, when Elizabeth said, right, you're looking after Mary Queen of Scots, absolutely. And you're right, it puts so much intolerable pressure on them, because the amount of security that you would need as well for your own, because you've got Mary Queen of Scots living there with you. And yeah, there was no way to refuse. I mean, Elizabeth was famous. She's a bit like Queen Mary. In our, with our present Queen's grandmother, who was, she'd bowl up at people's houses and expect, everything to be given to her. And Elizabeth would say, oh, yeah, she used to do this with Robert Dudley as well. Say, oh, could you put Robert Dudley up, obviously in a more Tudor fashion, could you just look after him for a bit? And it would cost thousands of pounds for these poor members of the aristocracy to put these people up. So yeah, it was, Elizabeth was exactly like that. She always took liberties when it came to friendships and people that that might benefit at some point from being kind to Elizabeth. But yeah, absolutely, it really does almost ruin Shrewsbury. Anybody else?
How well would she have been educated?
Well, she would have got, I mean, by this point, I mean, there were about 5% of women that were literate at this point, and it was obviously at that type of, that end of society. So she would have received some sort of primary education, as it were, but by the time she was 12, she was working, not in service exactly, but she was working with another family, with the Zouches at that point. But she would have been able to read and write, absolutely. At that end of society, there were, there was a realization a bit later on, but by the 1580s, there was a realization amongst educational experts that girls could be educated. And so even the poorest girls were, by this point, were receiving some form of education, and then, obviously working at other points as well. So being that further up the hierarchy in society, she would have received quite a good education until her father died.
Can I ask, do you know much about the extent to which she had to travel? Was she spending quite a lot of her time in London for her various royal appointments?
Yeah,
was she spending a lot of time going up and down what we'd now call the M1 to between London and Derbyshire?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of time where she and her husband have to spend in London, and they do with various husbands. She's spending in London, depending on their connections with the royal court. And then, of course, when the whole episode with Lady Jane Grey blows up, they have to leave London. So they are sort of back and forward quite a lot. And in fact, her children's godparents were the Greys, so they had to quickly kind of move away when the execution of the Grey family was happening. So yeah, they were well used to moving away. So yeah, she would be back and forward to London a bit, but I think in the later years when she was building Hardwick Hall, I think there was this exhaustion really when it came to looking after Mary Queen of Scots for all of those years. I think she sort of spent more time there, but I imagine quite a lot of the time when she was younger, there would have been sort of back and forth to London.
Are there records of a permanent house in London?
That I don't know, I'm afraid. It's because there were so many properties that they could pick from, but I don't know about whether there was a permanent one in London or not, I'm afraid.
How was her relationship with Elizabeth affected by Mary Queen of Scots' execution?
I'm not sure about that one. I mean, I'm not entirely sure what happened there, but I think by that point, so there've been 15 years of confinement. I imagine there must have been some fellow feeling between her and Mary, but I don't know how much that relationship was affected. And as you might know, Elizabeth was quick to say that that wasn't her fault, and she never knew anything about signing those that death warrant that came across her desk. So yeah, I'm not entirely sure about that. Might be slightly relieved to get rid of her.
It was Fotheringay, wasn't it? Because that's in the
That's
song.
right. Yeah, yeah.
And that's right. Northamptonshire, isn't it?
Can I just ask, is Cavendish Square in London, is that anything to do with the Cavendish family? Did they have a London house there?
I imagine it must have had something to do with them, but yeah, again, that's a bit of a guess, I'm afraid. But yeah, with that amount of land and property, I mean, I know when they bought Cavendish, when they moved to Chatsworth, I know that they moved a lot of, they sold a lot of land in the south and moved and consolidated, if you like, around Chatsworth. But I wouldn't be surprised if there was some connection with the aristocracy.
Cavendish Square is later, didn't exist in Tudor times.
But I guess it might have been named after.
I'm just thinking if they'd had a house.
It would have been named after a later.
Yeah, yeah.
Duke.
Yeah.
Sometimes the lands can extend for a whole county, though, can't they?
That's true. Yeah.
Land, you know, you wouldn't know how far they might have extended.
But yeah, that particular development of that part of London was later. So yeah, as you said, Melanie, it'll probably be sort of, yeah, much later, Georgian perhaps.
Yeah,
Anybody
laid out
else?
in 1717, apparently, if anyone's interested. Wikipedia again, sorry.
No, there's nothing wrong with that.
That's right.
Anything else from anyone?
Is it true that they corresponded between each other, Elizabeth and Mary Queen of Scots? Do you know that?
Yeah, they had those letters that they sent, but I mean, Mary Queen of Scots was very anxious to meet Elizabeth, but Elizabeth wasn't having it at all. I suspect it was because, you know, there may be an element of pity if they had met, because Elizabeth was, you know, wasn't completely cold, but I think that would have really affected the dynamic, the one-upmanship that they had between them. But yeah, they had lots of correspondence between them, and there's always the sense that Mary Queen of Scots is trying to sort of suss out Elizabeth and find out, you know, am I in the line of succession? You know, will I be next if you go first? And Elizabeth just won't let her have it at all. And it would have it would have been catastrophic to reveal in a way that Mary's going to be her heir, but also would have, would have solved a lot of questions for Mary Queen of Scots. But yeah, they did have a correspondence, but yeah, they never met. And there were lots of letters that went back and forth between them. And they used to call each other their beloved sisters as well. But you can tell they're two women that are sizing each other up to see how threatening they are to the other.
Could I ask a question, Simon?
Yeah.
Yeah, please go ahead.
How much personal input did she have in the design and architecture of Hardwick Hall?
I mean, she
personally supervised a lot of the work, and
yeah, I mean, so a lot of it was down to the I've forgotten the name of the architect. I had it earlier. I'm sure someone will find that. Yeah, so these ideas of Renaissance architecture. I'm not sure. I think she sort of had this vision. I think they're having her name up in her initials was partly of what she wanted to do, but I think so much of it is the particular styles that were being employed at that time and coming through in Tudor architecture. So there's something about the way that the hall was built as well that was very sort of new and innovative, and maybe that in itself is something that she brought to architecture, or she brought to what she wanted to bring it, what she wanted to achieve at the Hardwick Hall, was something that was new and never really been seen at that point. So there's lots of it is brand new, would never have really been seen anywhere else. So yeah, in terms of she was very hands-on with every house that she had, but I guess she takes the cue really from the architects themselves.
I mean, was it her idea to have this much glass as a statement of her? She wanted to show how she'd made it in life.
I think that would have been part of it. I mean, she owned glassworks, so that would have kept all of her people in employment as well. So, and it was a manifestation of real wealth that you could do this. It's very, if she was around now, she'd have a Bentley in the drive. She would be showing that, she was a woman that of great means. So yeah, so a lot of these materials were at her disposal as well. Okay.
Did the Queen ever
Anything
come to
else?
Hardwick Hall? Sorry. Did the Queen ever visit her at Hardwick Hall on a progress or anything?
I think by that I don't think that she did, but there were, yeah, it was quite a bit later on, and this is when Elizabeth is really starting to suffer. I don't think she was able to get there by the time it was all finished.
Okay.
I seem to recall the walls, maybe the inner walls, were covered with lots of tapestries. Presumably she had a lot of knowledge, did she, in this particular sphere?
Yeah, I mean, she did needlepoint, and also she and particularly Cavendish were very big on the interior, you know, sort of nice luxurious blankets and tapestries. So I think, yeah, she was certainly someone that had, you know, really refined tastes at this point as well. So yeah, she would know how to access these things from being married to particularly Cavendish. You know, they had a lot of, you know, woolen quilts and Spanish blankets and then tapestry. So yeah, I think she had a real eye for detail.
Yes, I mean, nowadays I seem to recall there wasn't a great deal of light there, because obviously the current custodians don't really want to let the light damage the tapestries. So really, that goes against all that glass.
Yes, absolutely. That's the only thing. You've got all that glass, you're gonna, your tapestries are gonna fade pretty quickly. So yeah, but yeah, I think so. Yeah, go on.
They kept the place warm.
Yes, absolutely.
They kept the place warm. They were also used for heating.
Yes, yeah, and yeah, actually that makes perfect sense. Yeah. But yeah, the whole sort of, yeah, the idea of, you know, this is a woman showing her wealth and showing her experience in life.
Yes, and presumably there'd be a cosmopolitan influence from the court, wouldn't there?
Yes, absolutely.
Court, wasn't she?
Yeah, definitely. And you've got all these fantastic, you know, at this point, the cloth industry as well in East Anglia, and then you've also got, you know, the influences coming in from the Netherlands at this point as well. So yeah, you know, she's living in a time when trade is quite successful, you know, later on in the Tudor reign, and everything it also all really fits in with what Elizabeth was trying to achieve as well. You know, if we look at the portraiture of Elizabeth, everything is sort of, you know, giving a certain image of her, and particularly wealth, especially if it's been stolen off Philip of Spain as well. So you know, every portrait has got something that, you know, shows a manifestation. So she was around that type of wealth and around those types of opportunities.
Do you know if she left any writings or diaries that survive?
I don't know. I imagine there must be, because, you know, I think there's so much else that's documented. You know, the things that she left behind in terms of accounts books and things. I wouldn't be surprised if there was something there. You know, I don't think it'd be particularly revealing about what she felt about people, but certainly some sort of reports of her life, not necessarily very kind of intimate ones though.
How old was she when she died? Sorry, you probably said it
already. She died in 1508, so she was 81.
Oh, pretty good.
Yeah.
Yes. Pretty good. Can I just say, one of the great advantages of Zoom talks is that you can sit and Google all the while. And I gather from a website that when she and William Cavendish stayed in London, that they had a house near St Paul's and a sort of more country home. At one point it says Brentford, and at another point it said where the current Boston Manor House is, but it was a previous building.
Oh wow!
Oh,
okay.
Really?
Wow. Okay, thanks for that, Melanie.
She clearly, as you say, must have spent a lot of time in London.
Yeah.
They probably had to watch out for pandemics, though, in that time.
Oh.
Watch where they were travelling.
Especially in Brentford. I don't live too far from Brentford, as you know.
But you
Yeah.
were allowed to travel 100 miles in those days.
Well, that's true. That's true. Yeah, and as long as you keep the distance. Right.
Any more
Any
questions
others?
for
Any more?
anyone? I think we've given Louise plenty to have to tackle, but if there are one or two more, otherwise,
That's fine.
I will say thanks once again, Louise. That was absolutely
Oh, it's a
splendid,
pleasure.
and what a
Oh, I'm glad
fascinating
you enjoyed
woman.
it. Thank you.
And thank you very
Thank
much
you
for
very
joining us and
much.
sharing your expertise and your enthusiasm. And
Thank
a
you.
few applauses are appearing on people's
Lovely.
reactions.
Look
Yes,
at this.
let's see if I can manage that. Yes, there we are.
Yeah,
And
the old-fashioned way.
Thank you
yeah.
very much.
good luck with your continued studies into this subject and your continued work with people at both in school and in your adult local history group.